What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest superstars comes face to face with the most controversial panel on daytime television? You won't believe what unfolds when Jennifer Lopez sits down with The View hosts for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a masterclass in how quickly things can spiral completely out of control when egos clash and unfiltered opinions fly. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The View promised to be a typical celebrity sit-down with Jennifer Lopez promoting her latest ventures, but what transpired was nothing short of television chaos. The atmosphere in the studio was already thick with tension before Lopez even walked onto the set. Sources backstage revealed that the hosts had been discussing Lopez's recent business decisions and personal life during their pre-show meeting, with several panel members expressing strong opinions about her choices. As Lopez made her entrance, the audience erupted in applause, but the energy from the panel felt notably different. Joy Behar's smile seemed forced, while Whoopi Goldberg's usually warm demeanor appeared strained. Sarah Haynes attempted to maintain her characteristic enthusiasm, but even she couldn't mask the underlying tension that was building. The initial pleasantries felt mechanical, lacking the genuine warmth that typically accompanies high-profile guest appearances. The trouble began almost immediately when Sunny Hostin opened with what appeared to be an innocent question about Lopez's recent business ventures. However, the way she phrased it carried an unmistakable edge of skepticism. "Jennifer, we've been watching your various business moves lately, and I have to ask, do you ever feel like you're spreading yourself too thin? Some critics are saying you're more focused on building your brand than delivering quality content." Lopez's posture shifted noticeably as she processed the question. Her media-trained smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "Well, Sunny, I think it's interesting that people always seem to question a woman's ambition. When men diversify their portfolios, they're called smart businessmen. When women do it, suddenly we're unfocused." The response hung in the air like a challenge, and the panel members exchanged glances that viewers at home couldn't miss. Whoopi Goldberg, never one to back down from confrontation, leaned forward with expression that signaled she was ready to push back. "Now hold on, Jennifer. I don't think this is about gender. I think this is about authenticity. People are wondering if you're being genuine, or if everything is just calculated for maximum profit." The word calculated hit Lopez like a physical blow. Her jaw tightened, and her hands, which had been resting casually on her lap, suddenly gripped the arms of her chair. The audience could feel the shift in energy, and the cameras caught every micro-expression as Lopez struggled to maintain her composure. "Calculated?" Lopez repeated, her voice carrying a dangerous edge. "I've been in this industry for over 3 decades, Whoopi. Everything I've built has been through hard work, dedication, and yes, smart business decisions. I'm not going to apologize for being successful." Joy Behar, sensing an opportunity to pile on, jumped into the conversation with her characteristic bluntness. "But Jennifer, let's be honest here. Your last few projects haven't exactly been critically acclaimed. Are you more concerned with quantity over quality? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." The studio audience let out an audible gasp at Behar's direct attack. Lopez's carefully maintained facade began to crack as she realized this wasn't going to be the typical softball interview she was expecting. Her publicist, sitting in the front row, looked visibly uncomfortable and began shifting in her seat. "Joy, I think you're confusing commercial success with artistic merit." Lopez shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Not everything has to be an Oscar-worthy performance to have value. I create entertainment that people enjoy, and I'm proud of that." Sarah Haynes, perhaps sensing that things were getting too heated, attempted to steer the conversation in a different direction. "Jennifer, let's talk about your upcoming projects. What can fans expect from you next?" But Lopez was no longer in the mood for pleasantries. The damage had been done, and she could feel the hostile energy radiating from the panel. "You know what, Sarah? I think we need to address what's really happening here. I came on this show to promote my work and connect with fans, but it feels like I walked into an ambush." Sonny Hostin, clearly irritated by the accusation, fired back immediately. An ambush? Jennifer, we're journalists. We ask hard questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. The word journalists seemed to strike a particular nerve with Lopez. Her eyes flashed with anger as she processed what she clearly viewed as an insult to her intelligence and professionalism. Journalists? Is that what you call yourselves? Because from where I'm sitting, this feels more like a hit job than journalism. Whoopi Goldberg's expression darkened considerably at Lopez's response. As the show's moderator and most senior host, she clearly felt that Lopez had crossed a line by questioning their credibility. Excuse me? A hit job? We're doing our jobs, honey. We're asking the questions that people want answers to. The tension in the studio was now palpable, with the audience sitting in stunned silence as they watched one of the biggest stars in entertainment square off against the daytime television powerhouse panel. Lopez's team backstage was frantically trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, while the show's producers were torn between cutting to commercial and letting the drama play out for maximum ratings. People want answers? Lopez challenged, her voice now carrying a tone of barely controlled fury. Or do you want to tear me down because it makes for good television? Because there's a difference, and I think we all know which one this is. The battle lines were now clearly drawn, and what had started as a simple promotional appearance was rapidly escalating into something far more explosive. The hosts had clearly underestimated Lopez's willingness to fight back, and Lopez had walked into a situation that was far more hostile than she had anticipated. As the commercial break approached, the tension continued to build, with both sides digging in for what promised to be an even more explosive confrontation when the cameras started rolling again. During the commercial break, the atmosphere backstage was electric with anxiety and anticipation. Lopez's team huddled around her, whispering urgent advice, while makeup artists attempted to touch up her appearance. But Lopez was beyond caring about her image at this point. Her eyes were blazing with a fury that had been building throughout the segment, and she was clearly ready for war. The View's producers were frantically trying to decide how to handle the situation. Some wanted to cut the segment short and move on to lighter topics, while others recognized that this kind of explosive television was exactly what their ratings needed. The hosts themselves seemed energized by the confrontation, with Joy Behar openly expressing her excitement about finally getting some real television, while Whoopi Goldberg was heard muttering about guests who can't handle the heat. When the cameras rolled again, the tension was immediately apparent. Lopez had repositioned herself in her chair, sitting straighter and more defensively, while the panel members had arranged themselves like a firing squad ready to unleash their next volley. The studio audience was on the edge of their seats, sensing that they were about to witness something truly explosive. Whoopi Goldberg wasted no time jumping back into the attack. Jennifer, before the break, you accused us of running a hit job. I want to give you a chance to clarify that statement, because that's a pretty serious accusation to make about veteran journalists. The emphasis on veteran journalists was clearly meant to be condescending, and Lopez caught it immediately. Her response was swift and cutting. Veteran journalists? Whoopi, with all due respect, when was the last time any of you did actual investigative reporting? Because sitting around a table gossiping about celebrities doesn't make you journalists. It makes you commentators at best. The studio erupted in shocked murmurs at Lopez's direct assault on their credibility. Joy Behar's face turned red with indignation, while Sonny Hostin looked like she had been physically slapped. Sarah Haynes sat in stunned silence, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating hostility. Gossiping? Joy Behar practically shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that made several audience members wince. We've been covering serious news and social issues for decades. We don't just sit here and gossip, we inform the public. Lopez laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound that cut through the studio like a knife. Inform the public? By ambushing guests with personal attacks disguised as questions? By creating controversy where none exists? That's not journalism, Joy. That's tabloid entertainment. Sonny Hostin, who had been quietly seething since Lopez's earlier comments, finally exploded. You know what, Jennifer? You came on this show to promote your projects, and we're asking legitimate questions about your career choices. If you can't handle scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be in the public eye." The word scrutiny seemed to be the final straw for Lopez. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes flashing with an intensity that made the cameras automatically zoom in for a close-up. "Scrutiny? Is that what you call this? Because I've been scrutinized by actual journalists, by real media outlets, and they manage to ask tough questions without being disrespectful or hostile." Whoopi Goldberg, clearly feeling that her authority as the show's moderator was being challenged, decided to escalate the situation even further. "Disrespectful? Honey, you're the one who came in here with an attitude. We're just doing our jobs, and if you don't like it, there's the door." The casual dismissal and the condescending "honey" were clearly meant to belittle Lopez, but they had the opposite effect. Instead of backing down, Lopez's anger transformed into something more dangerous, a cold, controlled fury that made her voice drop to a threatening whisper. "There's the door?" Lopez repeated, her voice so quiet that the studio microphones had to be adjusted to pick up her words. "Did you just tell me there's the door? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Lopez's transformation from defensive celebrity to powerful woman demanding respect was complete, and the hosts suddenly realized they might have pushed too far. Sarah Haynes, clearly panicking as she watched the situation spiral completely out of control, attempted to inject some levity into the moment. "Ladies, maybe we should take a step back here. We're all professionals, and I think we can find a way to—" "No, Sarah," Lopez interrupted, her voice now carrying the full weight of her decades in the entertainment industry. "I don't think we can. Because what's happening here isn't professional. It's personal, and I want to know why." Joy Behar, perhaps sensing that they were losing control of the narrative, decided to go for the jugular. "Personal? Jennifer, everything we've said has been about your public career and your business decisions. If you're taking it personally, maybe that says more about you than it does about us." The accusation that Lopez was being overly sensitive was clearly meant to diminish her credibility, but it had the opposite effect. Lopez's response was swift and devastating. "My public career? Joy, you've been making snide comments about my personal life, my relationships, and my business decisions since the moment I sat down. That's not professional journalism. That's mean-spirited gossip." Sunny Hostin, clearly frustrated by Lopez's refusal to be intimidated, decided to take a different approach. "Jennifer, we're not trying to be mean-spirited. We're trying to have an honest conversation about your career trajectory, and honestly, some of your recent choices have been questionable." The word questionable seemed to strike a particular nerve with Lopez. Her composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally began to crack. "Questionable? My choices are questionable? I've sold millions of albums, starred in dozens of films, built a business empire, and inspired countless people around the world. What exactly is questionable about that?" Whoopi Goldberg, sensing that Lopez was becoming emotional, decided to press her advantage. "Nobody's questioning your past success, Jennifer. But your recent projects haven't been well received, and people are wondering if you're more focused on quantity than quality." The repeated attacks on her recent work were clearly having an effect. Lopez's voice began to shake with emotion as she fired back. "Not well received by whom? By critics who were never going to give me a fair chance anyway? By people who decided years ago that I was just a pretty face with no talent?" The raw emotion in Lopez's voice was unmistakable, and for a moment, the studio was silent. But instead of backing down or showing compassion, the hosts sensed weakness and prepared to move in for the kill. Joy Behar, with characteristic bluntness, delivered what was clearly meant to be a knockout punch. "Jennifer, you're a talented performer, but let's be honest, you're not exactly known for your acting range or your vocal abilities. You're known for being Jennifer Lopez, the brand. And lately, that brand has been struggling." The brutal assessment hit Lopez like a physical blow. Her face went pale, and her hands began to tremble slightly as she processed the deliberate cruelty of Behar's words. The audience could feel the shift in energy as what had been a heated argument transformed into something far more vicious and personal. But instead of crumbling under the attack, Lopez's anger crystallized into something harder and more focused. When she spoke again, her voice carried a dangerous edge that made everyone in the studio sit up and take notice. My brand has been struggling? Joy, I've been successful longer than this show has existed. I've overcome obstacles that would have destroyed lesser people, and I've done it with grace and dignity. Something that clearly isn't valued at this table. The implication that the host lacked grace and dignity was not lost on anyone, and the panel members exchanged glances that promised an even more explosive confrontation was about to unfold. Whoopi Goldberg's face contorted with rage at Lopez's subtle but devastating insult. As the show's moderator and most senior host, she clearly felt that Lopez had crossed an unforgivable line by questioning their professionalism and character. Her response was swift and brutal. Grace and dignity? Whoopi's voice dripped with sarcasm and barely contained fury. That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of public relationships and manufactured drama. You want to talk about grace and dignity? Let's talk about how you've handled your personal life in the public eye. The studio audience gasped audibly as Whoopi crossed the line from professional criticism into personal territory. Lopez's face went completely white, her hands clenching into fists as she realized the hosts were now going to attack her most private vulnerabilities on national television. My personal life? Lopez's voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. You're really going to sit there and judge my personal life? After everything I've been through? After all the obstacles I've overcome? Joy Behar, emboldened by Whoopi's attack, decided to pile on with characteristic cruelty. Jennifer, you've been married multiple times. You've had very public breakups. And you've dragged your children through constant media scrutiny. That's not exactly the picture of grace and dignity you're trying to paint. The mention of her children was the final straw. Lopez's entire demeanor shifted as maternal instinct kicked in, transforming her from a defensive celebrity into a protective mother ready to destroy anyone who dared threaten her family. Her voice, when she spoke, carried a lethal intensity that made everyone in the studio recoil. You just crossed a line that you can never uncross, Lopez said, her words measured and deliberate. You can attack my career, you can question my talent, you can even insult my intelligence. But the moment you bring my children into this, you've shown exactly who you really are. Sonny Hostin, perhaps realizing that they had gone too far, attempted to backtrack. Jennifer, we're not attacking your children. We're simply pointing out that your personal choices have consequences. Stop talking, Lopez interrupted, her voice cutting through Hostin's explanation like a blade. Just stop, because nothing you say right now is going to make this better. You've shown your true colors, and they're uglier than I ever imagined. The studio was dead silent as Lopez stood up from her chair, her movement deliberate and powerful. The cameras automatically followed her as she began removing her microphone, her actions speaking louder than any words could. The hosts suddenly realized that their aggressive tactics had backfired spectacularly. Sarah Haynes, clearly panicking as she watched their biggest guest of the month prepare to leave, made a desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Jennifer, please don't go, we can work this out. We're all professionals here. Lopez turned to face Sarah with a look of such withering contempt that the younger host actually shrank back in her chair. Professionals? Sarah, professionals don't ambush their guests. Professionals don't make personal attacks disguised as journalism. And professionals certainly don't drag children into their petty vendettas. Whoopi Goldberg, her pride wounded by Lopez's public humiliation of the entire panel, made one final desperate attempt to regain control. Jennifer, you're being overly dramatic. We ask tough questions of all our guests. If you can't handle the heat... The heat? Lopez's laugh was cold and bitter as she turned to face Whoopi directly. Whoopi, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've faced actual journalists, real critics, and legitimate scrutiny. This isn't heat. This is cruelty masquerading as journalism. Joy Behar, unable to let Lopez have the last word, fired one final shot. Maybe if you had real talent instead of just good marketing, you wouldn't be so sensitive to criticism. The insult hung in the air like a poison cloud, and for a moment, the entire studio held its breath. Lopez's response was swift, devastating, and delivered with the precision of a surgical strike. Sensitive to criticism? Joy, I've been criticized by the best in the business, and I've used that criticism to grow and improve. But what you're doing isn't criticism. It's bullying, and I've never been one to tolerate bullies. With that, Lopez turned her back on the panel and began walking toward the exit. The cameras followed her every step as she moved with the dignity and poise of a queen, leaving a room full of peasants. Her team quickly fell in behind her, creating a protective barrier as they headed for the door. Whoopi Goldberg, clearly desperate to have the final word, called out after her, "Jennifer, you're making a mistake. This is going to follow you." Lopez stopped dead in her tracks and turned around one final time. When she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of her decades in the entertainment industry, and every word was delivered with devastating precision. "What's going to follow me, Whoopi, is the respect of people who watched this and saw exactly what kind of people you really are. I came here to promote my work and connect with fans, but instead, I got a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview. You've shown your audience that you're more interested in tearing people down than building them up, and that says everything about your character." The panel members sat in stunned silence as Lopez delivered her final blow. Her words were calm, measured, and infinitely more damaging than any screaming match could have been. She had turned their own weapons against them, using their aggression to highlight their unprofessionalism. "You know what the real tragedy is," Lopez continued, her voice filled with disappointment rather than anger. "You had the opportunity to have a real conversation with someone who's actually accomplished something meaningful. Instead, you chose to be small, petty, and cruel. That's not journalism. That's not even good television. It's just sad." With that devastating assessment, Lopez turned and walked out of the studio, her head held high and her dignity intact. The cameras captured every moment of her exit, from the determined set of her shoulders to the respectful way her team surrounded her as they left. The panel members were left sitting in the wreckage of what had been meant to be a routine celebrity interview. The audience was silent, clearly uncomfortable with what they had just witnessed. Even the show's producers seemed unsure of how to proceed as they watched their biggest guest of the month walk away with her integrity intact, while their host looked like schoolyard bullies who had been called out by the principal. Whoopi Goldberg attempted to regain control of the situation, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "Well, that was unexpected. We'll be right back after this commercial break." As the cameras cut away, the studio remained eerily quiet. The hosts avoided eye contact with each other, clearly aware that they had crossed lines that should never have been crossed. The audience began to murmur among themselves, their conversations clearly focused on Lopez's dignified exit rather than the panel's aggressive tactics. In the end, what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had become a defining moment that revealed the true character of everyone involved. Lopez had shown grace under pressure, dignity in the face of cruelty, and the strength to walk away from a toxic situation with her head held high. The View's panel, on the other hand, had revealed themselves to be exactly what Lopez had accused them of being: bullies hiding behind the pretense of journalism. The dramatic confrontation was over, but the impact would be felt long after the cameras stopped rolling. Lopez had won the battle not through aggression or cruelty, but through the simple act of refusing to sink to their level. She had shown that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred is to simply walk away with dignity intact, leaving your attackers to face the consequences of their own actions. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience began to file out, one thing was crystal clear. This was a moment that would be remembered long after the episode aired. And it would be remembered as the day Jennifer Lopez showed the world what real grace and dignity looked like in the face of unwarranted attack.